Well, hello and welcome to another episode 9 of the Grace Podcast. I'm really excited about this one. I've got Skip Collins with me, and I'm going to introduce you to in just a moment. But yeah, we're so excited that you've joined us. Thank you for tuning in. However, if you're watching this on YouTube or if you're listening in your car, we really are so glad that you've joined us. I've got Skip Collins, also known as Spike. Or Ship. You went by a whole bunch of different names. For those who are new to the podcast or not familiar with Grace's story, Skip and I have actually worked together for, can you believe it, Skip, 14 years I was working.
Yeah.
We came on to staff the exact same day, October 2007. And Skip was my boss and has been a mentor to me and a legend, really, around Grace Family Church. Skip has recently moved to the States. I'm sure you can share some of your story. And so we are Zooming from across the world. It's so great to see Skip, to see you again, Skip. That beard just continues to amaze. For those who can't see the video, Skip's got a long beard. But Skip is a theologian, he's a preacher, he's a pastor, he's a grandfather, a father, has an incredible story of ministry and of life. And as we're in this series, Asking for a Friend, we're asking these tough questions, like how can a good God allow suffering? How can we know truth in a world where it seems like truth is relative, there's alternative facts? And also the topic we want to look at today, which is, isn't the church being responsible for so much injustice, so much pain, so much hurt? And how does that work? And I'd love to hear Skip's view on this, and kind of a disclaimer. We don't have to always agree. And Skip and I, I think we've had times we've been on totally different poles of this thing, but we welcome that at Grace. We want to have a robust conversation. So I'm going to push back probably, Skip, and we're going to dance a little bit, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. I think from my side, I often hear the objection, which is, I love Jesus, but not so fond of the church. Gandhi's favorite word, I love your Christ, but your Christians are so unlike your Christ. And so how does that work? And maybe people listening to this have been impacted by church abuse. So what are your thoughts on how come the church is responsible for so much injustice, and what are we going to do with that?
Yeah. I think that if you polled most pastors, they might say the same thing. I love Jesus. This church is driving me crazy. I think that's the nature of things. I think we need to be honest and say, yes, the church has inflicted a lot of harm from time to time, which is incredibly sad. But it is, it is the truth. And I think we need to acknowledge that and be real with that.
Yeah.
And I think that, one of the advantages of getting older, which you'll soon learn, is as you look back, you realize, hey, let me not just put the blame on the Crusades, because I've done this too. There have been things in my own ministry that I look back and think, man, I said something that was hurtful, or I shouldn't have done that. And so I think first of all, we just got to acknowledge that that's true, because we're flawed human beings, and the church is just a bunch of human beings. And so we don't get it wrong all the time. And sometimes we hurt people. But I think that one of the important things to start with in this discussion is to say I don't think, let me say this first. I've often said when I preach, I want this to be the beginning of the conversation, not the end of the conversation. Like Tom said, if you disagree with me, that's fine. But I don't think Jesus came to start the church as we know it. That wasn't the goal of Jesus' ministry, to eventually get to the point where Hillsong's writing music and we're all singing their songs with lights and haze and the way we do church these days. I don't think that was Jesus' planned beginning. In fact, the only passage I can think of where Jesus speaks about is when he tells Peter, upon this rock I will build my church, and the powers of hell won't prevail against it. That's the only one I can think of. I might be wrong, but then Jesus spoke about the kingdom of God hundreds of times.
Yeah.
Jesus came, I would suggest, to really usher in this idea of the kingdom of God. But I think we've messed up what the kingdom of God is. We've got a wrong understanding, I think, of what the kingdom of God is that Jesus was talking about. And it's probably just because of the way we're wired as human beings. We hear kingdom, and we think about hierarchy, we think about structures, we think about how we're organized, and that's all okay. But I'm not sure if that's what Jesus was talking about.
So like the difference between a movement or a way of being rather than an institution.
It is, because kingdom immediately gives this idea of hierarchy. And so we have this, we've kind of equated the kingdom of God with the church sometimes. So there's this hierarchy, there's the pastor, or there's the priest or the bishop or whoever is in charge. And there's this thing flows down, but they're God's man or God's woman in the place, and whatever they say goes. Yeah. And that's okay until it gets to the point where we can't question that. We can't go against that because this is the way it is. There's this hierarchy that we have to fall into. And then it gets to the point where if you don't agree, you're not really in.
Yeah.
You're like in or out by what you believe and by what this person says we must believe. And so then it becomes who are we against? It's like they don't agree with us, so who are we against? And so we have all these campaigns of things that we're against, and I think all of that combined has the potential of being incredibly harmful when we think of the kingdom of God in terms of hierarchy. Remember when in the Old Testament, when the people came to Samuel because they didn't have a king, this group of people had no king, and they came to Samuel and said, all the other nations have a king. We need to have a king.
Yeah.
So Samuel goes to God and says, the people want a king. God says, no, they don't.
Oh, you really don't want that. Yeah.
You really don't want a king. Trust me, Hierarchies are no good. Trust me. And they said,
and he was right because all the kings sucked.
They all sucked, I know. Yeah. And so it's like, no, you don't. Yes, we do. No, you don't. Okay, I'll give you a king, but you'll be sorry.
Yeah.
But we have lived with this kind of hierarchical kingdom kind of mentality for a long time. We've brought it into the church, and I'm afraid that it has done more harm than good.
Yeah.
I think even in our modern day leadership culture around church that we talk about, that Grace has been a lot about, that I really believe in. But I think if we see church leadership without servant leadership, we've totally blown it. Yeah. Because church leadership is not hierarchical.
Yeah.
It's visionary. It's all those things that we talk about, but it's not hierarchical.
Yeah.
So even the idea of, you said in the beginning, Skip was my boss, and I supervised, and I probably acted like a boss, but it wasn't right. It's like we've got to see this thing in a less hierarchical kind of light, because hierarchies always do damage, and they always hurt people. You can look through history. It just is the way it is.
I like what you said about also the idea how we become gathered around these like propositional truths. So you're either in or you're out, and we've always said at Grace, we want you can belong before you believe, but we flipped that around and said, no, you've got to believe X, Y, Z if you want to belong. And so what happens is now when you start to feel like, well, I'm not sure if I agree with that, it's a very difficult thing as a human being now to say, well, I know the risk of me going against this idea because my belonging is now threatened, because I've seen people who've spoken out and said, we don't agree with that. And then they're gone, or they're kind of excommunicated or whatever. And so now you say, I literally had a friend of mine who just wrote a book, and it's quite a controversial book. And they've literally had a whole church saying, no, that book is not allowed to be read. That's sort of like, you've been banned, whatever. And the one person he spoke to, she says, I don't actually want to read your book because I know I'll agree with you. So I'd rather just not read it. Like literally she's saying, I know I'm going to agree with you, but I'd rather stay in my ignorance, in a sense, because this is my tribe,
Yeah.
So when you get into that little propositional in or out based on some kind of theory, that's kind of what I've loved working with you, Skip, because we've had on our team, we've had like fairly robust conversations on our leadership team at Grace. I think we're united around mission, or at least we've sought to be united around mission rather than around doctrinal or theological kind of things, and we've had space for that, and I've always really appreciated that.
Yeah.
So how do you speak to someone who has felt like they've been in an environment like that, or they've been hurt by that? Like, what would you say to that person?
Yeah, I think that's I think that we have to understand human nature. I've been hurt by my wife, and I've hurt my wife, and we love each other deeply. And the people we love sometimes, I've had long conversations with my adult children about how I screwed them up when they were little, about things that I've apologized for and I wish I had done differently. And so I think that we have to come at it as adults. And I do understand that the pain sometimes is incredibly deep. I mean, I know that, and I think that there are times when certain situations are toxic and we need to move out of those toxic situations. If we're in a toxic environment, we've got to get out of it, if it's toxic for us. But that doesn't mean it. And all these things we're kind of moving into other areas as we get going throughout the 3 weeks. But certainly the willingness to forgive, the willingness to let go, the willingness to move on. I think from a particular place as we kind of figure all this out. It's been really, really interesting because I've done had a lot of conversations with people that have left the church for these very reasons. There's this big word these days, deconstruction. They've kind of deconstructed their faith and they're not in church, but they miss it. There's parts of it that they really miss. I've got this little podcast, and I did an interview with one of my sons one time, and he didn't go to church much for about 10 years, but he talked about there were elements of it that he would miss. And so he would kind of jump back into it for a little bit, but the pain was like, okay, no, I can't do this, and then he'd pull back out, and his journey finally led him to a place where he could be a part of, and he doesn't agree with everything, but he can be a part of a place. And so I would encourage people to find that place, and it's a journey and it takes time. And if you need to just back out for a while, back out for a while, and
it's not going to be, like you say, it's not going to be perfect. Like, as you say, often it's the people closest to us that hurt us the most. But I think if there's an expectation, because we can bring on like a victim mentality when, oh, this has happened to me, and we stay in that place.
Absolutely.
Like I understand there's deep wounds there, but I do feel like, I mean, I know I've hurt people and people have hurt me in the church, and there's parts of the church that drive me absolutely crazy and I wish we could change. And there's other parts that, what I mean? So, and this is like my job, so I think that it's understanding that, as you say, where there are people, there are problems, and hurt people, and I'm one of those people, and you're one of those people. So I think it is in some ways right sizing our expectations. I remember Mark Stratton always used to say, find me the perfect church, because the minute you get there, it'll stop being perfect. So just any other thoughts? I mean, we got lots more. Skip's actually going to be with us, for the guys listening. He's actually going to be with us for the next 2 episodes as well. And I really like this idea of, we spoke around sort of deconstructing. I think we live in this world of sort of deconstruction and post-truth and all of that. So we'll talk about that next week. But for this week, just around any sort of closing thoughts around the church injustice, how we deal with church pain.
Yeah, I think, I mean, one of the parts of the question you asked at the very beginning, so let me address this as we wrap it up. The question was, do I need to be a part of a church to follow Jesus? And it's, I mean, the short, simple answer to that is no. It's not the organized churches, we know it. No, you don't.
There's no command in the scriptures that said, "Thou shalt be part of a local community."
No, you don't have to go to church. But with that, but there's a big but in this, is that you do need community, and I think the community aspect of church, of being together, is critical. We all felt it during COVID. I mean, I can sit home and watch Grace Online every Sunday, which I often do here in America. But I can watch it every Sunday. But it's not the same as being in the room, I want them to turn the camera. I want to see who's there. Like, oh, I want to see that person. Oh, I missed that guy, It's like there's an element of church that maybe the X factor or something that is incredibly non-tangible. That's not just about sitting and giving information.
Yeah.
Brene Brown one time did this wonderful blog about going to a church she had never been in before and standing and singing with strangers and how wonderful it was for her. You know, there's just something about being together that I don't think you can quantify. I don't think you can just quite put your finger on it, but it is there. And so I always would encourage people to find that community. It might be 5 people, you know, it might be a church of 2,000. I don't know, but find that kind of community. There was a TV show back in the 70s, one of my favorite TV shows called Cheers. And Cheers, if you know it, it all took place in a bar, right? So the whole thing was shot in a bar, and it was this group of people that came to this bar every afternoon. And there was a guy, his name was Norm. And in every episode, Norm would walk in, he'd open the door and say, "Good afternoon, everyone." And the whole bar would go, "Hi, Norm."
Yeah.
The whole place. The theme song of that show, if I can remember the words, it's my favorite TV theme song ever. I think it's making your way in the world today takes everything you got. I can't remember the exact word, but finding people that love you sure does help a lot.
Yeah.
And then it says, "Wouldn't you love to go to a place where everybody knows your name?
Yeah.
And everybody's glad you came."
Yeah, that's great.
You know? And there's something about church.
Yeah.
Where a place where people know your name, where they know you, the good, the bad, the ugly,
And
you know,
anyway. Yeah.
You don't have to be somebody else. You can just come and be yourself, and everybody knows your name. Everybody's glad you came, and you're a part of this community that I don't think you can find maybe in a Cheers bar, but it was made up, you know? So I don't know where else you can find that, but that's the element that I think we need. And that's an element that a church gives us, unlike at least any other place that I know.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I think that's beautiful. And I think that's a great place to end the podcast for today. We also want to say, hey, if you're watching this and you feel like you have come out of a toxic church space, or you're hurting and you're not really sure how to deconstruct or how to find a place to belong, and maybe Grace can be that for you, we'd love to just walk alongside your journey with you and figure out the next step, even if it means not ending up at Grace. But we do want to help you to figure out a place where you can belong and feel safe and come as you are, and that. So thank you so much for joining us for this week's podcast, Skip. It's been awesome, and we'll see you next week. So thanks so much.
Thanks, guys. Thanks.